A family request that changed everything, a true tale of love and sacrifice. It all started on a regular afternoon, one of those days when I came home from the gym feeling drained and in desperate need of a shower. The house was quiet as I walked in. I noticed that neither my mom nor my sister was around. It was only me. Nothing strange, yet it had been this way for years now, ever since my dad passed away 5 years ago. I had become used to the silence of the house in his absence, yet it didn't bother me much. It was just how things were so usual. I made my way directly to the bathroom, acutely aware of the sweat from my workout beginning to adhere to my skin. But in my haste, I realized I hadn't grabbed any clothes to change into after my shower. I wasn't worried though, no one was home. I thought, why bother, I'll be done in a few minutes and they won't. I'll be back in a bit. I left my clothes scattered around the house and headed to the bathroom. The hot water was refreshing, washing away the exhaustion from my workout. I spent a little longer than usual in the shower, savoring the peace. I wasn't rushing, thinking I had plenty of time to unwind, but little did I know, time was about to take a strange turn. As I emerged from the shower, water cascading down my skin, I found myself unexpectedly exposed, caught in a moment I never anticipated. I walked back into the living room expecting the house to be as quiet and empty as it had been when I arrived. Instead there were my mom and sister sitting on the couch, looking just as stunned as I was. The sight of them in the living room, where I had left my clothes just moments ago, struck me like a ton of bricks. My heart stopped for a second there. We were frozen in that awkward moment. I hadn't expected anyone to be home, and certainly not to walk in on them. As I stood there completely exposed, the silence lingered, stretching on for what seemed like an eternity. Their eyes sparkled with surprise, perhaps even a hint of amusement danced within them. I couldn't form a single word. I grabbed my clothes in a frantic panic, feeling more embarrassed than I ever had, and dashed toward my room. My face burned red from the most awkward and embarrassing situation of my life. In a blur of panic, I locked the door behind me, trying to process what had just happened. My mind raced. How could I have been so careless? I was utterly humiliated. Despite my family's understanding in the aftermath, the embarrassment lingered, and it's now been about a week since that moment. And for a while I convinced myself that everything was fine. I told myself maybe they had forgotten, or just moved past it after all. It was a one-time awkward situation. Life has a way of returning to its usual rhythm, yet despite my efforts to embrace it, behind me there was something lingering, something that didn't sit right. An unspoken tension lingered in the air, palpable and thick. A lingering presence, akin to a shadow that never truly departed, has made me reflect on my sister's recent behavior towards me. I began to question if they really had forgotten, or if maybe they hadn't. I found myself in my room, completely immersed in the enchanting realm of the video game. The sound of buttons clicking echoed around me, while the exhilarating rush of in-game action enveloped the space around me, offering a brief escape from the awkwardness that had been hanging over me. I hadn't given much thought to the events of earlier, until the sound of the door creaking open caught my attention. I turned to see my sister standing there, a playful smile dancing across her lips. She stepped into the room, and I gave her a quick smile, half expecting her to start talking about something completely unrelated. As was customary, she began to speak, but this time she infused her words with humor. Around with me, her laughter filling the air as she teased me about something silly. As she always did. It seemed innocent enough at first, just a playful banter we shared countless times over the years. But there was something different in the way she was acting now. She wasn't just joking or laughing with me, her touch felt more frequent, more lingering. It was like she was trying to push some boundary. I wasn't entirely ready for it at first. I believed it was just a typical aspect of sibling relationships. Perhaps she was simply being whimsical, as we frequently were with one another. Growing up we always had a lot of fun together, from harmless roughhousing to just sitting and laughing over inside jokes. It was the kind of bond that made us feel comfortable and connected. But as she drew nearer, her hand gently grazing my shoulder or back while she leaned in to whisper something, I began to experience a slight unease. The touches weren't aggressive or inappropriate, but they felt more intentional, more deliberate than usual. Couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted since that day. Perhaps I was merely overanalyzing the situation. After all, she was still my sister. And we had always been close, but I couldn't ignore the small nagging feeling in the back of my mind that made me wonder if something was different now. Was imagining things, or was there something she was trying to express without saying? Her laughter rang out, a playful touch lingering as she reached for me. Arm and teased me about my gameplay, but the whole atmosphere had changed. The comfort and ease I had felt before seemed to be replaced with a strange unease. I couldn't explain. I tried to focus on the game, but it was hard to ignore how her presence felt. More gripping now. It felt as though she was attempting to broach a topic that remained unspoken between us, and what troubled me more was my inability to find the right words to reply. Should I behave as though everything is just fine? Nothing had shifted, or was it more prudent to confront the elephant in the room, despite the discomfort that lingered as time went on? I started to feel more self-conscious, more aware of every little touch, every glance. I couldn't help but wonder what was going on in her mind, and whether this was just her being herself, or if something deeper was at play anyway. I continued play my video game, deeply engrossed, my focus locked on the screen, oblivious to almost everything else around me. Out of nowhere, I felt her hand touch my thigh. I barely registered it at first. I thought maybe it was just an accidental touch. She had a habit of messing with me when I got too wrapped up in a game trying to get a reaction. But when it happened again, I felt a slight sense of unease growing by. The third time, it became unmistakable that she was purposefully extending her hand, lingering in a manner that felt anything but accidental. Finally, I pulled myself out of the game, realizing and needed to address it. Mia, stop, I exclaimed, pushing away from the console and turning to face her fully. My voice emerged with an unexpected intensity, cutting through the silence, and the words lingered, suspended in the atmosphere. Her face shifted, her usual mischievous smile fading as silence settled between us. For the first time, I could see something changed in her expression, a mix of surprise, maybe even a hint of hurt. We were siblings after all, bound by a carefree close bond that had always been rooted in trust and playfulness, but now standing there in that thick silence, I could feel a strange tension was building, something unsettling. It felt like an invisible line had been crossed, and I suddenly found myself questioning everything about the moment. What's the matter, Jay? She finally asked, breaking the silence. Her smirk returned, but with an edge I hadn't seen before. Can't take a little teasing? Her tone held a subtle challenge, as if daring me to confront whatever lay beneath the surface. Had shifted between us. The lightness was gone from her eyes, replaced by something harder to read. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I faced her. You have to forget what you saw that day, I said firmly, trying to cut through the awkwardness. I hoped those words would make her understand that we needed to leave certain things in the past, things that weren't meant to linger, or change the way we saw each other. She stopped in her tracks, giving me a mock-offended look, crossing her arms dramatically, as she stared me down. The usual lightheartedness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a playful but determined glare. How could I stop? How could I forget what I saw? She teased, lifting an eyebrow with a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. I've never seen bigger like that. This awesome. You have every big thing, and you're my brother. Don't you want to share it with me? Come on, just let me try it already. I rolled my eyes, widened in surprise, but she was far from finished. It was clear she had thought this through. With a tilt of her head, as if preparing to deliver the final blow, she added that even Mom wanted to give it a try. And my father, well, he didn't have the courage to ask her. If you don't believe me, just look at her confidence. She was employing her favorite tactic, Mom's approval. She knew I would struggle to argue against that. So, I ran over to my mom in shock, practically stumbling over my words. Mom, what on earth is she talking about? Did she say that? What my voice trailed off, trying to process what I just heard. My mom looked at me, a bit taken aback, but still composed. She gave a little chuckle and Said, well, you know, she's actually right. I'm 55 years old, and believe it or not, I've never seen sighs like this before either, until one day she finally came to me. Her voice was soft, but filled with a quiet determination. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and sadness in her eyes and said, come on, we're your family, we love you, and we want you to be with us. Don't shut us out. She took a deep breath before continuing, it's been hard without your father. You know, he passed away 5 years ago, and I've been left to hold everything together on my own. I tried my best, but there are so many moments when I feel completely overwhelmed. Some days are just so lonely only, and I could really use someone to lean on, someone who understands. I've missed you so much. And I know your father, I would have wanted us to stay close to support each other. She looked down for a moment, as if gathering the courage to go on, and then spoke again, her voice now tinged with a sense of urgency. And your sister, she's almost 23 now. She's young, but she's been struggling too. She's never really had anyone to depend on. Northwest boyfriend, no close friend she can truly count on. She's just alone. Her voice softened as she squeezed my hand. We not asking for a lot. I promise you'll enjoy it. You'll feel that sense of belonging again. It's what we all need, and I believe it's what you need too. She looked at with a quiet intensity that made me feel like time had paused, and then without any warning she reached for the hem of my shirt. Her fingers were steady but quick, slipping beneath the fabric and lifting it up, and before I could even understand her intentions, my shirt was gone. Her movements were deliberate, yet there was a tenderness in them, as if she was acting on some impulse that she herself didn't entirely understand. I was frozen, my mind racing in an attempt to piece together what was happening, but it was as though my body had lost the ability to react. Every small gesture she made, her fingers brushing my skin, the way she tilted her head as she moved, seemed to carrying unspoken message that I was struggling to decipher. Then she began to unbutton her unshared, her hands moving slowly, almost carefully. Each button came undone. Her gaze never left mine, and I could feel my heart pounding, my breath caught somewhere between shock and intrigue. I didn't know what to say, or if there was anything I should say. I didn't make a single move, unable to break the spell that had taken over the room. As she continued, a surreal atmosphere enveloped us, like we were both suspended in a place where words no longer had meaning, where action spoke louder than anything we could possibly say. I wanted to ask her what was going on, wanted town to stand the reason behind this sudden shift, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. All I could do was watch as she peeled away the last layers of clothing, and it felt like each movement was somehow slow, and yet impossibly fast. See if time itself was I was still just trying to comprehend what was happening, to make sense of in my head. Curiosity, disbelief, a touch of apprehension. It was all happening so quickly, yet every second felt like it stretched out, hanging in the air, leaving me in a state of wonder and confusion. Moment I laid eyes on them without any clothing, something changed in me entirely. It was as if the world paused for a beat, drawing my attention to every detail of their bare skin, the way it caught the light, the soft curves and lines that seemed to invite my touch. Wasn't just an impulse, it was a slow-building need that I could feel in every fiber of my being, a craving that surprised even me. Thoughts of restraint began to blur, fading into the background as a more primal urge took center stage. In that instant, the only thing that seemed real was the space between us, and the undeniable pull I felt toward them. My mind raised, filled with images of what it would feel like, the texture of their skin under my fingertips, the warmth that I could almost sense radiating from them. It was a magnetic draw that was both thrilling and consuming, leaving me feeling like I was on the edge of something I couldn't quite name, but deeply yearned to experience. I felt my heart pounding faster, my breathing growing shallow, the desire to bridge that gap, to reach out, to touch. The feel intensified, every rational thought melted away, replaced by a single powerful longing that I had never experienced with such intensity before. The room around us to fade into obscurity, leaving only the three of us in this charged moment. It wasn't just about the physical desire, it was something deeper, a connection that felt almost inevitable, as if every choice I'd made had led me right here to this moment, and in that space all I could think about was a touch, the sensation, and the electric connection waiting to be sparked between us. Without a moment we dove headfirst into fulfilling our three deepest desires, barely stopping to consider what might come of it. Each urge, each hidden wish felt like it had finally clawed its way to the surface, demanding attention. The excitement and freedom of acting on them were all-consuming, like an intoxicating rush that swept us away from any sense of caution or hesitation. It felt exhilarating, liberating even, to ignore the usual voices of reason, the caution whispers that might have otherwise held us back. We were caught in a whirlwind of powerful momentum that pushed us forward with each choice, no matter how reckless. Each decision fed the sense that we were unstoppable, untouchable. We were driven by a mix of excitement, impatience, and perhaps even a touch of defiance. After all, these desires were things we had fantasized about. Endlessly imagining what life would be like if we dared to go after them with nothing to restrain us, and now it was all unfolding like a dream brought to life, but in that rush we didn't consider the ripple effects that might be set in motion, their repercussions that might come back to confront us. The consequences were vague, distant notions, shadows we didn't want to acknowledge, much less confront. It felt as though the future could wait. What mattered was seizing this fleeting sense of freedom, as if time itself might stop for us just long enough to let us indulge in that moment. Each action felt justified, even necessary, like a piece of ourselves that had been hidden was finally being set free, and so continued, driven only by the thrill of experiencing everything we had longed for, racing ahead with hearts wide open and minds shut tightly to the potential cost of our actions.